Hey, everybody. Welcome to our session. And my name is Thom Hart. I'm the Director of Outreach here at CPR&D. We have a really exciting panel discussion. Before we go through and introduce all of our panelists, I would like to invite Dr. Michelle Campbell to speak about PFDD, which is the base. We've heard about it a lot already this week. And Dr. Campbell is the Associate Director for Stakeholder Engagement and Clinical Outcomes, the Office of Neuroscience at the FDA. Dr. Campbell?
Yeah, I kind of forgot about this.
Yeah.
In a good way. Okay, so I've got two mics on. You guys got me, so I'm not going to be squelching the panel. Maybe I'll stand here so I can minimize that. Thank you, Thom. And thank you guys for coming back to this session. I'm just going to kind of set our stage for our conversation that we're going to have today. Hearing directly from folks with lived experiences in rare diseases. Talking about FDA's patient-focused drug development, what does it really mean? So I think it's important as a stage setter, and Cheryl yesterday in the session kind of brought this up, but patient-focused drug development, it's not just a CDER concept. It is actually for all three of our medical product centers. So really it's patient-focused medical product development as well, depending on what you're doing. So this counts for CBER, for biologics and gene therapies and cell-based therapies. Our Center for Devices is interested in this as well for how they apply with their regulations. But it's a systematic approach to help ensure that the patient's experience, perspectives, and needs, as well as their priorities, are being captured in a meaningfully way, and that it's being incorporated into drug development and the evaluation of the set treatment. Specifically, FDA has their own led patient-focused drug development efforts, which include our patient-focused drug development meetings that we were put on. They started back in 2012 under PDUFA 5. And we were kind of charged with starting this deal. Right now, it's important to know that patients and what matters to patients and what's important to them and seeing treatment and clinical benefits is something we've always cared about, irregardless of the name of patient-focused drug development. It's always the forefront of our everyday work, right? But what this really did was kind of put a focus on making sure we are actually capturing this experience throughout the drug development cycle. And so we've had patient-focused drug development meetings that we've led, where we have brought in and had our internal experts and listened. We have spared from that. We have a very successful externally led patient-focused drug development meeting. And most of those meetings are in rare disease, right? This is an opportunity that is outside, but you work with the agency to host these meetings, and the three medical product centers will attend. We've been doing more virtual lately. Obviously, it's a great option because it can get hard to come out to this area. But we do participate, we do listen, and we take back what we hear in those meetings. I think that's important to know is that we're hearing, you may not necessarily immediately see what we've heard in that contribution to drug development immediately, but we do take what we're hearing back. And when we're getting INDs, when sponsors are coming to talk to us, and if we've had a patient-focused drug development meeting, or if there is a voice of the patient report or a patient listening summary, which is another opportunity, we will leverage that. We will inform us pretty immediately if we have some active INDs happening. We also have our methodological guidance series that I'll highlight in a little bit. But why patient-focused drug development is important is because it helps establish the therapeutic context, what is an important aspect of when we're looking at benefit risk, right? So ultimately, if we have a marketing application, we have to make a regulatory decision. We're going to balance benefit risk. And so making sure that we are keeping the patients the forefront of everything is what we do, and this is important. And we know from our experience is that patients and their families are the best ones who can tell us this information. So how can we integrate patient input into medical product development and decision-making? This really shows that it's a spectrum. It's not a one-time deal, right? There is opportunities throughout the drug development aspect. I literally just had someone come talk to me about, hey, I want to talk about perhaps how we can do looking at things in the preclinical space. And I'm like, I may not be your expert, but that is awesome because I did say come early and often, come talk to us, right? Hey, I said it, so you did exactly what I said. And so here's a way when we apply the aspects of drug development from the translational side to a post-marketing aspect where we can integrate the patient input. And as you can see, it is throughout this cycle. So a quick timeline, if you're new to this or this term, it started back in 2012. I joined the agency 10 years ago, so I've been through the infancy of this and to where we are now, and it's just amazing to see how much it's grown. We had our patient-focused drug development meetings. We have our externally led meetings. We were under 21st Century Cures. We have now a patient experience table that we mark off in NDA reviews if the data has been submitted to us and how it was used, and where you can find us talking about that in our reviews, as Dr. Bracchio said. It's more than just a label. Go read our reviews. They're really, really informative of what we were thinking. We began our methodological guidance series, which is out. We have a standard core grant program that's a pilot to, again, expand on. And you heard some mention yesterday about this global nature, right? Drug development's global, rare disease drug development even more is global, right? And there is an effort really at the global level with an ICH reflection paper on patient-focused drug development and really work that's continuing to explore this. So really quickly, I want to highlight the one aspect of patient-focused drug development that is a buzzword that everyone's talking about right now, which is patient experience data. So you see a lot of words on the slide, right? This was put into 21st Century Cures as well. And during the same time, we were going through our PDUFA 6 negotiations. So there was a lot of overlap between the two, right? And so this is really a very broad umbrella definition, right? Patient experience data can vary, right? And so what it can be, and this is not limited to, is our patient listening sessions, our patient-focused drug development meetings, your clinical outcome assessments that are used to support your clinical trial endpoints. Sometimes people forget about that one. But that is patient experience data. We are capturing what that trial experience was. That's how we were able to do it. We have patient preference studies. I know that that is something that there's been a lot of work in that, particularly in the gene therapy aspect with the benefit risk, because we don't know what long-term safety is. And we know that in our genetic-based rare diseases, this is where a lot of people are hoping for gene and cell therapies. Thoughts on benefit risk, just qualitative thoughts, right? What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on clinical meaningfulness, right? What would a change look like? What would success look like here, right? So it's not limited to this. There's a great avenue of what it can be very qualitative, it can be very quantitative. We have ways to engage with us with our listening sessions, our patient-focused drug development, particularly the externally led meetings, as well as critical path innovation meetings, which is really, those meetings are for specific topics that are outside of a drug development program that may be new, novel, or really early, and you want to try to get some agencies' high-level thinking. It is a very popular program. I will tell you that it is very popular. And so the demand and the staff don't always align sometimes. I think you've heard how we do our very best to accommodate what we can. And that's one example where there is such a great mechanism that sometimes when you would like to have one in, when we can actually do it just because of calendars, it doesn't always align, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try for one. We do try to make sure we respond to those requests and really give out valuable information no matter what. So I've talked about patient-focused drug development meetings. These can be really important. This is where we sit back and we're the listeners. We sit and learn. We are hearing directly from the lived experience. And this can be directly from patients. It can be from their loved ones, the caregivers. And this is really important. And at the end, we get a voice of the patient report. This is something that we can refer back to internally when something's coming up, as I've mentioned, that we may want to check, hey, did I hear this? You know, we got this coming in. Are we measuring the right things? Well, let me go see if there's a voice of the patient report. Every day, we're looking up these. Lastly, we have this methodological guidance series. I think Robin is left, so she won't skew me for this one. I say that. So we have this really great methodological guidance series, right? It's a labor of love. It is a guidance series you will never see written this way ever again, probably. I got some head nods from my colleagues who are like, yeah, we may not do this way again. But this is a really foundational document that truly talks about how do we systematically collect information from patients and families and translate this into with the scientific rigor into that clinical outcome assessment realm. Cheryl talked a little about that yesterday, but particularly about something we affectionately refer to as guidance 3. And then how does that support our trial endpoints? I will say this, guidance 1 and 2 were written and really meant for patients and patient groups, right? They are for you guys, if you're out there. And they're also for my industry colleagues as well. But this is like, we know that a lot of patient groups want to start doing this. And this is a great way for them to see what our thinking is, what are the approaches, what are we going to need for that scientific rigor, right? Guidance 3 and 4 are definitely for more of our industry colleagues, the measurement scientists. There are folks out there who actually know how to implement these. So if you start reading it and you're feeling very overwhelmed, that is an okay feeling to have. Know that there's folks out there who can help. And I say that, I always get chuckles when I say that with those kindnesses, but it's really true. Like if you are just not a measurement person or really had this experience before and you get pulled in there and it's going to be an overwhelming thing. But there are people who know how to do this. And it really was for how do I take this data now and transition it into that trial space. So with that, I'm done, Thom. And I really want to get to the better conversation with the folks we have here with us today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Michelle. Great. So I am a co-moderator for this session. My other co-moderator is Andrea Pauls-Backman. Andrea is a former president of the Les Turner ALS Foundation. She is an ALS advocate and former caregiver. And so I'll let her do the rest of her bio for herself. And then we'll go through and introduce our panel and move on to some questions and conversation.
Thanks, Thom. I'm really happy to be here today. I think the fact that we are talking about patient experience with people living with ALS and with other diseases, folks who are joining us online, are so important. I came to this, yes, I was a caregiver for my mother who passed of ALS. I left a long career in investment management to do this work, and I've served as a board member as well as chief executive of several ALS organizations. Again, I'm excited because I think we're at an inflection point with ALS. We've had a lot of trials. We've had a lot of trials that have failed. We need to understand, I feel like I'm going in and out here. We need to understand the patient voice, and it's not a singular voice, the patient voices throughout the process. So I love what Michelle has kicked us off with, and I'm excited to dig in.
Excellent. Stacy.
No, I'm sorry.
No problem.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Stacy, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, your experience, and how you've come to join us today.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm very, very grateful to be here, and I thank the Critical Path Institute for including me on this fabulous panel. I have a lot of things to be grateful for. I'm grateful, firstly, for my wonderful husband who's next to me and my two fabulous sons, one of whom is here today, to make my very existence possible. They encouraged my advocacy efforts, and I really appreciate it. Prior to my diagnosis, I worked for 20 years as an obstetric anesthesiologist, which probably led to my quicker diagnosis. In July of 2020, my first symptom was not being able to crack a medicine vial in the operating room. I didn't think much of it. I ignored it, actually, and compensated. Then followed by right leg weakness, and I realized something was wrong. I first led to the path of seeing a general neurologist and actually a neurosurgeon also. I have spine disease. I'd already had a lumbar fusion. All my symptoms could have been described by a cervical spine pathology, which I had. However, fortuitously, I had trouble swallowing, which turned out to be a benign thyroid nodule. However, it led me to a quicker diagnosis. Not everyone is so lucky. I pushed, and probably because of my knowledge and my background, I pushed to be seen by a neurologist who further specialized in ALS. And I eventually came in February of 21 to hear those horrible 3 letters. You have ALS. I immediately went into a tailspin. You kind of see black when you hear that diagnosis. And when I emerged, I decided I wanted to live with ALS, not die from it. And I wanted to throw myself and my knowledge into advocacy and learning more how I could help the community. And that's when I became involved in many organizations. I threw myself into every bit of knowledge I could find. My early diagnosis enabled me to participate in trials as a patient. I was on the Healy platform D trial for dopamine, and I am lucky enough to be on the EAP now that I'm no longer eligible for trials. I also contribute to a biorepository, giving my blood and urine and speech samples to help contribute to studies. I also contribute to natural history data. In addition to being a patient and participating in scientific research, I threw myself into the community. I became a NEALS ambassador. That's the Northeast ALS Consortium, and that gave me knowledge to help the community further. I became involved in many patient ambassador and scientific boards to contribute to the development of trials. I became involved in the congressionally directed medical research program through the NIH to help discover new trials. Thank you. And I also became involved in research committees for ALS United Mid-Atlantic, among many other things. And I'm so happy to be here today to contribute even more. And I thank you all for listening.
I know that, as you can tell, I have ALS. I'm married to a beautiful woman and who's sitting back there recording me. I have 3 beautiful kids who are married, so I have 5 children. I also have 4 granddaughters who are the love of my life. So that's the best thing. A little bit of background on me. I am a pharmacist by training, like Colin. There, I did work in pharma and biotech for over 30 years, so I know enough to be dangerous when I'm talking. And I worked in the industry either with or for biotech. My leg's shaking. I have chronicity, as you know. A little bit about my activity. When I was originally diagnosed with ALS, I actually was diagnosed first with PLS. And as Greg Pruitt is going to talk from the SPF, I was involved with the Spastic Paraplegia Foundation for a number of years. In 2017, I received the diagnosis of PLS that was changed on November 11th of 2020. I say that because everybody who has ALS knows the exact date when they received the diagnosis, November 11th of 2020. My diagnosis was changed to ALS. I'm currently being followed and treated by Dr. Matthew Harms at Columbia University. When I was diagnosed with ALS, I dove into the organization and advocacy. As people may know or may not, I'm a little bit active in the community. I've been involved in the NIH ALS strategic planning process and was on the steering committee with Ellen Phillips, Rita Sadler, and Bob Brown. I'm also on the AMP-ALS persons with lived experience working group. I'm the co-chair along with Phil Green, so I'm involved with AMP-ALS. And last but not least, I was nominated and elected to be the ALS advisor to the executive committee at NEALS. So I'm involved with NEALS day to day. So I'm pretty active in the community. Before I turn it over to the next speaker, 2 comments. One, as most of you know in this room, it's cold in here. And my body's not cold. By my nose, it's cold. It is running. So if I bend down to wipe my nose, don't notice it. Number one. Number two, and I talked to Colin and Thom about this. I'm not a big fan of the words lived experience. We talked about it. I know federally the term is patients with lived experience. I'm not dead though. I'm living. I have living experience, not lived experience. So keep that in mind as you move forward. With that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. Greg, Greg, do you mind speaking?
Good morning to all of you. The Spastic Paraplegia Foundation and I both are very pleased and excited to be invited to be part of this process and this discussion this morning. I enjoy always hearing from others who are dealing with some of these issues and problems in life. But as you just said, we need to turn what are problems and find ways to make our lives better and the lives of those that deal with these with us better. I have hereditary spastic paraplegia. I come from a family that we know of over the last 3 generations. 14 of us have had or have hereditary spastic paraplegia. I was in public office for 27 years and was about to run for re-election to another term in January of 14. And my wife, Norma, who serves as executive director of our foundation these days, she and I made the decision on a Sunday afternoon, watching playoff football, that it was time for me to withdraw from my professional life and spend more time dealing specifically with physical therapy and the issues of this disease. When I left the home the next morning to go to the office, I had a public meeting, and she doubted when I left that I would follow through with that decision. And as you all know, how we learn a lot of our news these days, she saw on Facebook, before I could call her after my public meeting, a reporter had already caught my announcement and put it on Facebook that I was withdrawing from public office and from that re-election campaign to focus on dealing with HSP. It wasn't coincidence that morning that when I got back to my desk and turned to my computer The very first email message I had that morning was from then president of the Spastic Paraplegia Foundation, Frank Davis, asking me if I would be willing to serve on that board of directors. I knew about the foundation, had made a few donations, hadn't gotten very involved at that point, but very excitedly accepted his invitation and the board's invitation to do that. So we went to work with the board in 2014 and have been serving as a board member since then. I have been very privileged to be asked by that board for the past 3 years to serve as its president. We have a list of board members who are actively working every day collectively together to find treatments, find cures, find therapeutics, find therapies that can make a difference in the lives of all the people affected by hereditary spastic paraplegia and primary lateral sclerosis. And our foundation works hard to bring both of those patient groups together. Although the conditions that we have are different in many ways, there are very many common issues, common pathways that we have to deal with on a daily basis. And so we work together to raise awareness among our population. We're working hard to raise awareness with so many other groups, whether it be pharmacy, government, other patient groups, those who need to be at the table to help make a difference in this arena these days. And so, again, Thom, we appreciate the opportunity to get to know this group better and to be part of this discussion now and productively in the future.
Thank you, Greg. And BJ, would you mind introducing yourself as well? Good to see you.
Yeah, hey everybody, my name is BJ View, here today representing the Huntington's disease community. Almost 30 years ago, my mom was diagnosed with Huntington's disease, and she passed away about 15 years ago. I know that I don't have Huntington's. I got the genetic test and I tested negative, but through many of my advocacy efforts, I've met some of my best friends who either are going through Huntington's today or one day will get symptoms if nothing is done about it. And that's my pure passion mission, is we got to do something about it. And you know, Huntington's is a rare disease, but we're a mighty community, but we need to get in more conversations like this. So Thom and team definitely appreciate the opportunity to be here and be at the table and continue to push this community that just needs so much. And I've had the opportunity to start advocacy organizations, to start companies in the Huntington space, to lead a patient listening session that Michelle talked about 2 summers ago. And there just continues to be opportunity to accelerate treatments and accelerate policies for this patient community. So just appreciate the chance to be here, be a part of the conversation, and to learn from many of you on stage and in the audience.
Thank you, BJ. Great. So now's the time. We have some prepared questions, and then we've reserved a little time at the end for audience questions. So write them down when they come to mind. So to begin, we've touched on this a little bit already, but can you guys describe any participation you've been engaged in with drug development efforts and the incorporation of your lived experience or your loved one's lived experience? Who would like to go first?
I'll start.
All right, Lane.
As I mentioned, I've been involved with NIH developing the ALS strategic plan that was and is so important to this community. It's a roadmap to move forward with research. I understand the CDC or FDA has a strategic plan also, but this is focused on the research front, finding a cure. That's so important. Regarding personal experience with research, I was not eligible to be in a clinical trial because I've had symptoms for a long time. But with that being said, I was in the EAP for Relivrio, which is no longer most of you know that was taken off the market. But with that being said, EAPs are so important, and I'm working with several companies. Myself and Stacy are both working with companies that have EAPs available for the ALS community.
I want to add, and Lane and I had the joy of actually serving with Lane in the ALS strategic priorities, and his leadership there had really been tremendous in developing that work. With respect to drug development, there are two things that I have focused on, I guess, and I've testified before advisory committees a couple of times. And that is the huge unmet need in ALS, which I think should never go unsaid. ALS, as Rich described so well earlier in the panel today, is a terminal disease. It is rapidly progressive. What people forget about ALS is the rapid turnover within the patient community. So roughly 25% of the community turns over every year. That means, as we are looking at what our friend Sandy Morris, a tremendous ALS advocate, referred to as the ALS clock, is that we have to keep the issue of urgency in mind. So we're always trying to balance various factors, and that's part of the whole patient-focused drug development program as we go through the pipeline. But those are the two things I would urge people to keep in mind.
Oh, no, go ahead, Stacy.
Right, it's the lifespan, average lifespan for an ALS patient is 2 to 5 years. That's very sobering, and not enough time to contribute to research. My being involved in trials, research trials as a patient is not for me, it's for the future. And to enter most trials, you have to be within 2 years of diagnosis, and many people don't even know. Actually, I take that back, 2 years of first symptom. Many people aren't even diagnosed in those 2 years and not eligible for trials. So I feel by acting as a patient in these trials, I can hopefully help the future patients to make ALS, if not curable, a livable disease. And also my greatest involvement, and one that I truly enjoy, is being on the advisory panels for pharmaceutical companies in the development of trials. It's so important to get the patient voice. As you can see from Lane and I, this is very challenging, and we want to use our voices to make trials and future treatment options more accessible and more doable for patients.
Thank you. And
Thom,
please,
can I jump in?
Yeah.
This is BJ. You know, from the Huntington's community too, it's unique because it's almost the opposite. You know, the families in the Huntington space are there forever. You know, it's from one generation to the next generation to the next generation, and you can see it coming. You know, when you have a parent who has Huntington's, you can look right in the mirror and you know that could be your fate one day. And it's a little bit of a python, right? This disease wraps its arms and body around people and kind of suffocates families, and they're exhausted. They're too tired. And you don't find many people who have the ability to participate in trials, whether that be, you know, they don't have a stable home, they don't have the finances. There's a ton of obstacles that bring this to life. And, you know, there was never an option for clinical trial participation for my mom, although we're on a great cusp of an opportunity for folks to participate in maybe the next year. But we need to continue to push. We want to give a treatment to people before they ever know, or before symptoms ever arise. And we're just not there yet. We're still testing treatments in people who have symptoms, but we need to get to the point of putting treatments in people and testing them in people before symptoms arise. And I believe that's what the community really wants.
Thom, may I jump in here for just a second?
Of course.
I want to pick up on what BJ said, he's exactly right. I mean, our group, those of us who have HSP and PLS, we don't have that kind of turnover that is situation in the ALS community. But diagnosis on the front end is very frustrating. We hear stories from many over and over and over about it taking 10, 15 years to find a diagnosis. And so one of the things that our foundation is doing to try to deal with that to some degree is last year we worked with some researchers to create what we call the SPF Centers of Research Excellence. And there are right now 11 clinics across the country, if you might have HSP or PLS, that are working together to create common platforms, common information, so that as we get that information from you, you might be more timely diagnosed, number one, and number two, that we might have all that information together much quicker if we can proceed in the future towards some possible clinical trial or other patient-based information that we need to have. And in that regard, and I'm sure that other patient groups have this issue as well. We at Spastic Paraplegia Foundation, we want to invite and ask everyone who has been diagnosed, who has either of those two conditions, to register with us on our foundation and our platform so that we have your information. Should we learn about a clinical trial, for instance, with HSP, there are right now something like 85 different gene variants. And so there are all kinds of clinical trial possibilities that could happen. And every now and then we get connected with a physician or a researcher who's interested in finding a pool of people to participate. So we'd like to ask you, if you have HSP or PLS, to get with us on our database, on our platform that you can access through our website, sp-foundation.org. And if we get a request from a potential researcher, we're not going to give them your information without your knowing it. But if we reach that point, we can move much more quickly toward a potential trial or potential process that could result in an important therapeutic.
Yeah, one thing, Tom.
Of course. Yeah.
Keep in mind, we're in DC today. So what I'm going to say is real appropriate. I was taught by Sandy Morse and Kathy Collette, who's in the room here, that when you come to DC to advocate, you're walking. If you're a person with ALS, you're walking to the congressional visits. Year two, you're using a walker. Year three, you're in a wheelchair. Year four, you're not there because you died. So keep that in mind when the turnover takes place in the ALS community. I was taught that. I was shocked to hear that, but I've seen that time and time again with people I know. So keep that in mind.
If I could put a little bit of you're 100% right, Blaine, you're 100% right. I want to put a little bit of a positive spin on that, which is given the acuity of a disease like ALS and the rapidity of the disease process, the generosity of spirit that it takes for folks like Stacy, for folks like Lane to come with their family members, to drive hours, to deal with all of the pitfalls that take place to get from one place to another. And then on top of it, folks spending their time to participate on all of the panels that we've just talked about. We've talked about all these working groups that are happening through AMP-ALS. We're talking about natural history studies. We're talking about strategic plans. This is such a selflessness. It is a selfless project. It's not necessarily going to help any of them or their families, but they care enough about this and they care enough about the greater population to choose to spend their time to be here and to do this work. And I think we really need to thank them. So.
I want to highlight something that Greg brought up about clinical trial readiness. So I spent a good portion of my everyday talking to patient groups and advocacy groups across the spectrum. some that are newly formed because they now have that genetic diagnosis and they are leaving where they thought they were and starting anew and they want to come. I have folks that are preparing for when a trial opportunity arises for their communities and how can they prepare their community to what that is going to entail? What is that going to be? I talk to groups that may have active pipelines, right? And are hopeful that we can get the clinical benefit information from the trials to folks who may have had an approved therapy. And we do not have a lot, I acknowledge that. But they are hopeful that just because they may have something, it will continue to spur because it may only have impacted a small portion of their patient population, because we know we have a heterogeneity that occurs. And so I hear about the spectrum. And I think when I think about how do we apply patient-focused drug development with that spectrum of where I may be in that realm as a patient advocate, when I go talk to them, sometimes my conversations can be, well, here's what FDA does. I may be the first person from FDA they've ever met or talked to, right? And we can see people think we're, like, who are these people? We're somewhere up, in this black box, right? And so you're just introducing, like, here's what we do, here's what our mandates are. Our role is to protect the public health, of the US population. And then it may shift about what do we need to know about clinical trial readiness? And so I think if I took that slide that had that arrow about the aspects of drug development, and I underlaid also from the living experience, underlining that, right, of where is this opportunity to build in could also go there. And I do hear often from folks that's, who may, particularly in the ALS community, and I hear this often, unfortunately, we're unable to be able to participate in a trial because of that diagnosis. And we fully understand this is, I think I mentioned yesterday that sadly, sometimes it's the process of elimination for a lot of rare diseases until we can determine, because we still need good biomarker development. We still need better early diagnostics. However, though, by participating in other ways to capture data through natural history studies, through observational studies, is critically important still for drug development, right? So sometimes it's not just the trial. Yes, the trial is important. I don't want to diminish that with what I'm about to say, but your contribution in other ways, so again, natural history, observational, perhaps helping inform for payers aspect, if we are able to successfully have a treatment, that voice is still important. And so I think you should find the other opportunities. If the trial is not there, how can you still contribute information that will be informative for that future? Because we really need to know that. And so I want to come off being as there are many opportunities, and I hope that we're able to explore what that can look like, because it is all informative to drug development.
Absolutely. So I think that this raises a really good question, which is CPATH. What opportunities do you think the collaborative setup of CPATH can help materialize to incorporate lived experience or living experience voice in trial design to conduct rare and orphan disease research? Don't all answer at once.
Well, I think CPATH, through their various disease-specific consortium, as well as their non-disease specific efforts, have done a great job in their history of incorporating that lived experience where appropriate, where the topic is. And I think with this continued push and understanding, I see more inclusion in the consortium activities that I participate in out of the Office of Neuroscience. And so I think is extremely important, as we've discussed yesterday. Drug development is a multi-stakeholder approach. We at FDA are one stakeholder, right? I think my colleagues or my other health authorities would say we are a stakeholder piece, but in drug development, we need other stakeholders to contribute. And I think that's what the ideas and approaches that we can think about in public-private partnerships, about bringing all of those stakeholders together to combine We know that's really important in our rare disease space. We don't have many opportunities. I hear, I'm constantly reminded by Elaine and personally, I had a family member pass from ALS, so I know that time is on our side. There's some other patient advocacy groups that I've spoken with this summer. One of them was reminding me that time is myelin because as they progress, they're losing more myelin, right? That's another one I've heard recently. So there's definitely, we are very much aware of that. And so this is why we do have to globally work together by leveraging all these stakeholders. And so I think first and foremost, Greg, BJ, Lane, and Stacy, are why we are doing our work. And they also can be a critical contributor as we do that.
Great, thank you. So panelists, you're all really accomplished advocates in your own areas. What would be your most valuable learning to share across rare and orphan diseases in terms of incorporating your voice and your family's voice in involvement in the drug development process?
Go first.
I'll let you.
Go ahead.
I think my advice would be, first of all, that no question should go unasked. Educate yourself, dive in, and find the area that you want to be involved with. It can be overwhelming. I know when I was first diagnosed, I wanted to do everything at once. And it was really, really overwhelming. Then as much as I knew, and as much as I was familiar with the medical field, I was really lost. It was overwhelming to someone like me. How can it be for patients who are not educated in the field of science? And regulatory systems, which I knew nothing about. It really has been an amazing education for me. So I would advise someone to ask all questions, find out what area you would like to be involved with, and dive in.
I'll add, remember, this is not just ALS. All neurodegenerative diseases are progressive. Keep that in mind. It's so important to remember that day-to-day status changes. What I mean by that is I remember one of the first meetings I attended on virtual, and a person on the meeting was a physician, was crying and complaining about how his father with ALS was in a clinical trial, but all of a sudden he couldn't swallow. And the capsules he was taking, he could no longer administer. So with that, he was kicked out of the study because they didn't have an alternative for a progressive disease. Keep that in mind at the start of designing trials. All these diseases are progressive and we get worse. It might be at a different rate, but have alternatives available to keep people in clinical trials.
Can I add something
Yeah.
to that, Tom? And I think Stacy alluded to this in terms of getting educated. So I want to put a plug in because Lane is the patient representative on the NEALS Executive Committee. NEALS is the Northeast ALS Consortium, which is the largest group of leading clinical trial and clinical researchers in ALS across the country, across Canada. And there is a program that they run, which they've now trained hundreds of people living with ALS, called the Clinical Research Learning Institute. It's called CURLI for short. The CURLIs are held over a 2-day period. It is a wonderful way for people living with ALS to understand process of clinical research, to understand observational studies, as Michelle discussed, to understand the value of those studies, to understand the clinical trial process, and to understand the regulatory process. So they're free. People can do them online, in addition to in person, and it's been a wonderful way to train a patient population to then serve on the sort of patient advisory boards that we're talking about. So industry members, and you're out there, to know that these when you're looking to put individuals on a patient advisory board, these are folks that are trained, that understand the process.
Thom, I'll jump in and just share my.
Start at the start of developing your trial. Don't develop the trial, then go to the patient community and say, we have this, you agree with it. Have input at the beginning.
And BJ, you want to speak?
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I would just agree with the education piece that Sandy said. And, I'm a little bit jealous of the ALS community. Andrew, what you described is something we need. I think the HD community is relatively uneducated about this process. And, we have an upcoming PFDD in November as a community. And I think we also just need to hear from the regulators and people making the decisions who are coming to attend those events, what they need to know and what they want to know. Because even hosting and leading a patient listening session 2 years ago with a good friend of mine, Seth Rotberg, we didn't have much guidance and truly understanding, like, what did our audience who was coming from the FDA, what did they know already? And what did they really want to know? So we had to kind of guess to make this agenda in hopes that we fit the needs of these attendees, but we didn't really know what the attendees wanted. So the more we can understand and have conversations around, what is something that they want to know, then I think we can be better educated to share the proper message.
Well, I can say, BJ, sometimes we simply just want to know what your everyday is like. I mean, I know that sounds very simple, but that is extremely informative to us at that level. I think, and obviously in patient listening sessions, and I very much do remember yours from two summers ago, that's, I think, a lot of times that first opportunity that folks have, right, to hear from us. And these are very well attended listening sessions from our medical product centers. But I know it's a simple answer, is just to hear your everyday, that experience. It helps us understand the heterogeneity from the different perspectives. And sometimes from just hearing that, we will then help us think about, I remember a listening session that we've had where we were describing about the living experience, what caregivers and family members have went through with their family members. Because it was a genetic-based rare disease, and I remember we were sitting there and we're hearing this, and we're like, but we know how to measure this really important concept that we're hearing about, right? And we were taken back because we hadn't really heard this before. So sometimes just simply hearing is extremely informative to us, and we can then say, well, have you looked at this? So we actually maybe help you better sometimes in that way. I think when we talk about our patient-focused drug development meetings, which are extremely informative, and we are very much looking forward to the Huntington's one in November, it's a little bit longer. So we do have a little bit more time to kind of get into some more of that, what would success look like, or what would a treatment benefit look like? What is really the hopes and priorities if we were to have a successful treatment, what that look like? So please know that it's sometimes just hearing that is the basics and extremely informative information for us to take back. So do know that, and we do have opportunities when we do get the request. If there is something specific we want to hear, we can add that in. We can say, hey, can there be a conversation on concept this, right? For example. So please do know that sometimes just hearing the everyday is what is actually the starting point and extremely important to us.
So we have about 7 minutes left. I want to open it up to audience questions. I do know that lunch is next, so also 7 minutes until lunch, everybody. So feel free to raise your hands. We have some mics ready to go. And you can take one of those questions.
So.
Is class going first?
Class is going to go first.
Okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
You,
No,
yeah, turn your mic back on.
I have one.
So this is exactly the reason why we're here. Let me just insist on that. So, Lane, the hotel has been notified about the temperature. Let's hope that they don't overshoot it in the other direction. Stacy, your perspective is so especially valid to me because we're all very cocky clinicians until it happens to us. And I've lived through that myself. And that's when we realize if that's so overwhelming and confusing to me, imagine how it is for other people. That is such a valuable perspective. BJ, the fact that you're really interested in sharing the knowledge of the day-to-day is, as Michelle pointed out, a really important component. And Greg, this is not just about a single disease, but as you pointed out, the journey to diagnosis and the ability to turn that diagnosis into action for participation in research, for involvement in setting things up for the benefit of the people that really need the collaborations. But importantly, connecting the dots to the fact that your input is critical in the T-shirt message. Without your input, there's no correct context of use. And without a correct context of use, there won't be tools. Without tools, there won't be acceleration. But I'll leave the audience with one thought, and it's potentially a big dream. The Act for ALS was a really remarkable piece of legislation, not just for ALS, but for rare neurodegenerative diseases. Imagine a world in which we had the Act for Rare Diseases and Pediatrics. And I'll just leave it at that.
ALS was amazing. It really put ALS on the radar with federal agencies. Prior to Act for ALS, ALS was another disease. But after passage of that act, it was amazing how federal agencies have pitched and focused on ALS. Agreed.
So as we get to the questions, I just want to highlight one thing that I think it's a combination of what we are here on this panel for, and I think it's the great panel to make this comment, and it's reflective of also yesterday's conversation when we talked about clinical trials. And so we know we've heard, I think it was even highlighted this morning, that we don't get as many successes as we want, right? And trust me, we are just as sad as you are. We are. When we find this news out ourselves, we really are devastated as well. And so in the rare disease space, I want you to know that we are absolutely committed to rare disease drug development across the board. We want to see successful treatment options. And I want to also add that we look at everything at the individual level. So we look at that specific program when we are reviewing marketing applications that come in. And while there may be other prior precedent, that does not drive what we're really doing. We specifically look at the data that's included. And this is why we talk about in rare disease, we understand how critical that engagement is with us, as well as making sure that the living experience is being captured. We don't have many opportunities because time is not on our side, right? It is not on our side. And so we have to get this right. And so this is why we need to do it. And so please know that we want it as much as you want it. I want successes. We all want it. And that we are looking at this based on what is coming in at that individual program level.
Thank you.
I want to tell Michelle, I really appreciate you saying that. This is a wonderful experience. All the effort to be here right now. I just asked my husband, it isn't easy to get me to this point. all the effort and bringing regulation, patients, the stakeholders, industry together is so crucial and critical to work together, not be divisive. That's really my mission. I'll give everything I can to push this forward.
Thank you, Stacy. Does anybody want to follow that with a question?
It's hard to follow that act. I will say to Greg, Stacy, and Lane, I thought I was busy, but now I feel lazy compared to you guys. So my first short question to Michelle is, are part of the engaging patients' efforts, including what's been brought up, since yesterday, this idea of diagnosis takes a long time, so they can't participate in trials? So that's that question. My second question is really to the caregivers, including Stacy's husband. How can we as sponsors reduce the burden of participating in a trial? Because we know that also is part of the decision in whether or not you say yes.
I want to hear from the caregivers first.
Yes.
I mean, I will chime in, but I really actually want to hear from that perspective. I think it's a great perspective. I know we have Stacy's husband. I know Lane's wife's out there. We have BJ, who was also, a caregiver. I would like to hear that as well.
Dan, do you want to go first? We're all looking at you. Sorry. I didn't prep him, by the way, so.
I'm not Mike. Well, I'm Mike now. Anyway, so repeat the question one more time.
Yeah, how can you help inform industry as a caregiver? We know how burdensome clinical trials are, even us. This is why I'm interested, because can I think of ways in the decentralized world as well? How can you help inform us about what are things that should be thought about in the clinical trial design on that burden aspect, outside of just, I have to do so many assessments and so many blood tests, the actual participation piece?
I think from a caregiver's perspective, helping the home is troubling. So we have aides. I work full time. So, and many caregivers work full time. So when you have aides at home, that's not covered by anything. That's all out of pocket. So if there's a way to cover those expenses, that would be helpful. And that's where the true burden comes through. And then also all the medical equipment that comes along with things. So there's a lot of apparatus that goes along with things. I mean, this chair is covered, but all the other apparatus is not covered. So.
That's good. And BJ, do you want to chime in as well?
Yeah, I'll chime in and just agree. I mean, I'm thinking of a friend who's in a trial, and most Huntington's trials require you to have a caregiver join. And these people have 2 young kids under the age of 7. Husband works, she doesn't. Like, how do you expect to have them take 2 days out of their life 5 different times over 2 months? It's just, we should not just be asking the patient, but we need to be asking that caregiver too.
Thanks. And yes, Lane's wife.
They might turn it on from the back end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is with regard to clinical trials you're asking about
Mhm.
for design. So like Lane said, we haven't had the opportunity to participate, but I would say as a caregiver, there's probably the financial burdens of getting to where you need to get. There's just a tremendous amount of logistics, right? So anything that can help with the logistics. I mean, I'm forced retired. We're both retired. So I can pick up and go, but many people are not that lucky, right? So anything from a trial design that you can reduce some of the traveling burden, if there's anything local that can be done, whether it's blood tests or whatever, if there's that would probably, I would think, be the most helpful for people that, picking up and going on a plane is like crazy, and picking up and going by car, depending it's very variable depending upon where you are in the disease process, will dictate how much support you might need on the other end.
And I would say, as a former caregiver, one of the concerns we always had with clinical trials was the exact logistics you're talking about. The babysitter, the parking, the things people don't think about. Yes, I think we've moved forward with remote collections. We can do home phlebotomy, we can do visits, televisits. So we've moved forth in that regard, but we forget about those basic logistics. They still come into play.
All right, well, we are over time. So I want to take a second and offer my tremendous gratitude to all of the panelists for being here and sharing so much with us today.